Hello, everyone. We'll wait just another minute. And we are also streaming out to 5 different platforms right now. The Water Consciousness Movement on Facebook, that's included. Okay, let's get the party started.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
welcome everybody. In substitution of our weekly coherence meditation event that we hold every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, we have decided once a month we'll switch things up a little bit and we'll do something different. So today we have Veda Austin. So from her About Me page, I'll just read a couple paragraphs about her. Everybody is aware. Veda is a water researcher, public speaker, mother, artist, and author. She has dedicated the last 8 years observing and photographing the life of water. She believes the water is fluid intelligence observing itself through every living organism on the planet and in the universe. Her primary area of focus is photographing water in its state of creation, the space between liquid and ice. It is through her remarkable crystallographic photos that water reveals its awareness of not only creation, but thought and intention through imagery. And I remember you, Veda, from another movie that you're featured in, actually in Terrain. So I'm glad to have you here. Welcome, and we'll get this party started. I guess over to you, Seth, to do a little intro, and we'll have a little jam session.
I have had I don't know the word, I've just had such profound experiences with Veda online. We're in separate parts of the world. And I've watched how she's begun to do this and how it has evolved to where it's at now. And she gave me a little preview of some of the new stuff she's been working on that I hadn't seen. And oh my God. I mean, after I was like trying to hold my tears back because it's one of these things that it just so challenges what most people think and believe about themselves and reality and all of that. And it allows us to expand into new potentials. It allows us to recognize and harmonize with the frequencies of reality, the natural living universe. And, you know, we've all gotten kind of caught up in this societal, civilized, now kind of AI thing. And it feels really good to not only get back in touch with nature, but to do it in a way with somebody like Veda, who is absolutely at the cutting edge, like a literal pioneer of this work. It is, I can't even stop. I'll go off. She knows I will do. It's amazing. But before we pass over to Veda, we're going to do a quick little 5-minute meditation. And I just want to say to everybody that the meditations that we've done previously, they're not time sensitive, they're timeless. And my recommendation for people who are really serious about becoming conscious of all their quantum selves while they're in these bodies, and then allowing their consciousness to expand so that all of that, the infinity, all your quantum self spread out to all of it, harmonizes and aligns so that you can begin to live in this being with all of that energy potential. Because me and many others feel like it's time for unity consciousness, and the way we do that is with us. So do those meditations if you want to. I mean, you don't have to, believe me, but they focus on specific bodily systems that will up the amplitude of your own energy. So just wanted to throw that in. All right. So I'm going to calm down because I'm so excited. So, and I'm going to ask everybody to just get comfortable, however that is for you. Start breathing deep, gentle, rhythmic breaths. Inhale, 4 seconds on the exhale, 4 seconds on the inhale, or whatever works for you. And when you feel like you're calming down, take your attention and first put it right into the middle of the head. If you can feel the pulse of your heartbeat in it, great. If you can't, it doesn't matter. Just focus your attention while you're breathing. And why we start in the middle of the head is because that's where the most energy is for most people, you know, especially if we're living in this world and we're always trying to think and navigate our path and all that. And we can get in our heads and forget that we have this profound temple connected to our head. So we get into the head, we breathe, we relax, and then we allow that awareness in the middle of the head to just drop right into your heart. And put a gentle smile on your face, because when you do that, you activate different feeling potentials that the heart will naturally emit when it's in harmony with the brain. And allow your heart and brain to communicate however that is, whether it's a feeling or song or words or tone, whatever that is for you. And just know that today, if you haven't seen what Veda is bringing to the world, you're in for a really special blessing. Because obviously we are all water beings. If we're well hydrated, we're roughly 70% water. Our blood is 93% water, roughly. And it's been found that 99.9% of our cells are composed of or surrounded by water or fluid or all the different textures and layers that water produces. So just smile to that and really give thanks, because to connect with water is to connect with it all through the living galaxy, the living universe, the living multiverse, and way beyond, and at the same time, totally grounded within our beings. So, all right, let's gently kind of open our eyes, come back together, and get ready for a fun, enlightening, I don't want to say wet because nobody's gonna get wet, but you're gonna love this. It's amazing. So Veda Austin, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, Seth, and hi to everybody. It's so nice to see you all. So we have a lot to share today, so I'm kind of jump into it. So for anybody who doesn't really know what I do, I am a water crystallographer, which is just a fancy way of saying that I take photographs of water in a specific stage of freezing, and I study the patterns that occur after it's been inspired in some way. Inspiration can include thoughts, words, media, environment, pretty much anything that we are influenced or inspired by water can also be influenced and inspired by. And like Seth was saying, when we really take a look at how much water we are, it's quite phenomenal. By molecular count, we're 99% water, which means there are more water molecules in our bodies than stars in the Milky Way. When we cut ourselves, we leak. When we cry, we leak. When we sweat, we leak. When we go to the bathroom, we leak. And there are various other things that show us that we're really so much more water than we realize. Something that I always think is so interesting is that by the eye lens is 99% water, which actually means that we literally see the entire world through the lens of water, which is quite an interesting thing when you think about that. So what I'm going to start doing is really just sharing my work. So there were 3 people who inspired me to really begin. I also had a healing journey with water, which I'll see whether or not we can get into that, because that's going to take a little bit longer as well. What was that, Seth?
Well, it's so profound, you almost got
well, maybe I will. So I'm just going to start screen sharing, and we're going to kind of go on a little bit of a journey.
All right.
So that does lead into the let me just squiz over. So I'm just wanting to make sure that everyone can see the Rudolf Steiner quote. Is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
So I always found this very interesting. So the human being thinks that he creates intelligence, whereas he only draws intelligence from the universal sea of intelligence, which can be quite confronting to the ego, at the idea that we're drawing from another super intelligence rather than our own. But I think it's really interesting to just kind of let that be absorbed and see how that feels, because Steiner really said a lot of very profound things. So as we kind of move along, hopefully my little guy will do this. We're going to just kind of talk about my healing journey with water, which is really where this all began. So I was in this horrendous car accident, and we went under a 7-ton truck, rolled twice. The driver died immediately. It was considered one of the worst accidents in New Zealand when someone actually survived. Over the course of 20 years, I had 8 surgeries, and on my 8th surgery, they found that I had blood clots in my lungs, and I'd gone in for bowel surgery. And I woke up from having a stent put in my small bowel, and there were doctors saying, well, you didn't recover very well, and you need to be on warfarin for the rest of your life, which is a blood thinner. And I was in my early 20s, and I was fit, young, healthy, and I was very confused as to why that had happened. And they couldn't even give me an answer for it, really, other than I'd had so much anesthesia over the course of years from surgeries. So I took warfarin for a few months. They did an X-ray, found my chest was clear of clots, and they wanted me to continue to take it. And I really didn't want to. There was a resistance in me. And what's kind of an interesting one is that I decided that I wasn't going to take it anymore, which was quite a big decision when you're being told, you could die, this, and that. And I decided to anyway, because I had absolute faith that my body knew exactly how to heal itself. And so I started to look at all kinds of ways to keep my body in balance. And I ended up talking to a doctor. He's a medical doctor, but practiced Ayurvedic medicine. And he said to me, if you can find a natural, emphasis on natural, source of naturally high alkaline water, it might help to stabilize your body. So there's a lot of blanket statements out of there in the world about alkaline water and structured water and what they actually are. And so we're going to get into what is structured water soon. But what he was talking about was a natural source of alkaline water, water that comes out of a spring. It's not ionized through a machine. And in New Zealand, where I live, we have a lot of springs, a lot of aquifers which are naturally alkaline. And so I started drinking various different alkaline waters to see what might happen. And I actually really did it very seriously. I did 2-week trials on different waters, and I treated each water as if it was a medicine water. Now, as you can imagine, my body had been through quite a lot. I also had stage 4 endometriosis. So 8 surgeries were for bowel surgery, shoulder reconstruction, and stage 4 endometriosis. So that's rather a lot for my poor little body to have dealt with. Now, there's a reason that my son, his picture is there too. And I'm going to get into what happened when I discovered a specific water that really did a lot of crazy, amazing things to my body. But on top of being told that, I had blood clots and various other things, over the course of the time that I was seeing doctors for surgeries and whatnot, they told me that I would probably never be able to have children. And 3 doctors separately, individually, because of all the scar tissue from my injury, told me I would never have children. And so rather than taking it to heart, I put it on the shelf and thought, well, we'll see. In the end, I ended up having a child for every doctor that told me I couldn't, because I hate being told what I can't do. But I didn't have them out of defiance, they're all little miracles. And so when I was telling a friend, this was back when I lived in Christchurch, the day before the second big earthquake that we had there. I was telling a friend about what happened in this car accident. And my son, Rama, he was only nearly 3 at the time. And as little children do, they hide and they spy on their parents and stuff. And he was spying on me, listening into my conversation that I was having with this woman about this car accident. And when I finished talking, Rama, he like appeared out of nowhere, and he jumped up on my lap and he said, "I remember that, Mummy." He said, "I remember the window wipers and the tires." And he said, "I came down out of the clouds and I went like this and I saved you. And when I knew you were okay, I climbed back up the ladder into the clouds." I was like, "Oh, my baby, thank you so much." And in these moments and in all these tragedies that can happen in our lives that have such a big impact on us, in that particular moment, it made me realize how much more there is. And how we are chosen by our children, and how there is something so incredibly special out there that maybe we feel, but we just haven't been able to put into words. Well, in that moment, Rama put everything into this beautiful perspective for me about everything I had been through. So that's why his little face is there.
At 3 years old, he did that, huh?
Yeah, just the 3
3
years
years old.
old. And they're very, very innocent at that stage, and they don't know how to lie. They do probably, but they get better at that as they get a bit older. But at 3, they're fairly innocent. So I had, and I'm going to look at you whilst I'm talking about what happened with my car accident. So I spoke to this Ayurvedic doctor, and he said, try these different alkaline waters. So I started drinking different naturally sourced alkaline waters. Anything alkaline is above a 7 in pH, which stands for potential of hydrogen. And it kind of goes up exponentially, much like a Richter scale does for earthquakes. So there is a huge difference between a 7 and an 8, and it keeps getting bigger. And so I was trying water between a 7.5 all the way up to an 8.8. And eventually, after not really noticing anything particularly other than feeling hydrated, because that's the thing, isn't it? It makes it very difficult for us because our skin isn't see-through. We don't really know what the inner workings of our body looks like. We can only feel it. And so I only had how I was feeling to go on. So in the end, I had a wellness center back then. A client came and she said, I know this old guy, he's got a private water source. the pH out of the ground is 9.9, and he's only giving it to cancer patients, and maybe he'll give you some. So I thought 9.9, my God, that's so high. And I just went to see him, and he gave me a month's worth to try. So I was using it like a medicine. I had a liter in the morning, an hour before I ate, and I had a liter an hour after I ate dinner. So I only had 2 liters of this type of water, and the rest of the day I drank whatever other kind of water was a local source. So I'm fortunate in New Zealand, it's easy to go and collect water from a spring. So I started drinking this water, and within 3 days, I noticed a really big difference in an area a lot of people don't talk about, but I feel would be really kind of wonderful if they could. And that is about bowel motions. So bowel motions are a wonderful way for us to see the internal workings of our body. What is going on? We live in a constipation nation all over the world. It's kind of interesting. There's so many people. The more people that start talking about this, the more you realize there are. They're literally sitting on the toilet trying to push out a pebble for like an hour.
Yeah.
And this is definitely an issue because there's such a problem with dehydration and quality water over quantity. There is differences in different types of water, which we're going to kind of cover as well. So when I started to drink that particular water, I noticed it had a very unique taste. It was slightly sweet. It also had a viscosity about it, so it felt thicker. And I don't know if you've had that experience when you've been really, really thirsty and you haven't had any food, you can feel the water moving through down into your body. So even when every single time I had that water, I felt that sensation going through my body, which was different than other waters I'd been drinking. So things started moving, which was good because I'd had so much bowel surgery. So that was really relevant to me. And I think it's relative to all of us because, you know, being able to have things move is such an important part of being able to detox. One of the reasons that people actually die when they have are on morphine, like is it morphine? Yeah, for pain relief towards the end, is that it constipates them. They're not able to go to the toilet. And so there is a poisoning that happens because they're so constipated. And a lot of people don't even realize that. And I only learned that from a doctor about a year ago. So anyway, so that was good. But on day 10 and 12, something rather extraordinary happened. So I noticed that there were all these bumps coming up along my arm and my jaw that were really painful. And so I knew my body was purging because I hadn't changed my diet, my skincare, or any of these things. And I'm like, well, what is going on? You know, I thought, what is this? And one area felt really, really sharp. And so as gross as it sounds, I got some tweezers and I started like digging in there and I pulled something out and it was this little shard of green glass. And I'm like, what the heck? And then over day 10 and day 12, I pulled 27 pieces of little shards of green glass out of my arm and jaw. And what's extraordinary about that is that 20 years prior, I had been in that car accident. The man who died owned a nightclub, and in the back of the car were crates of Steinlager beer. Now, my accent probably sounds like I'm talking about a grizzly bear. So I'm just defining that I'm actually talking about the lager beer. And it comes in a green glass. So when the car rolled, some of that glass got into this side of my body and I got more windscreen on the other side. And I was like, how the heck can water purge me like this? This is kind of crazy. And I was so worried that a glass was going to come out of my eye, but our body's so intelligent, gratefully, it didn't do that. And so I then started to become very curious to think, well, you know, I wonder if it's just me having this purging effect, what would it do for other people? So I had a lot of very willing participants to start drinking this water because I had a wellness center, but I also had my dad, and my dad's a pretty famous personality here in New Zealand. He's Maori. And his name is Bill Hoheper. He's kind of known for his giant eyebrows and big mustache, and he does fishing videos. But because he's had so many fishing incidents, he had a fish fin that went between his knuckles years and years and years ago, and he thought he'd got it all out. When he started drinking this water, the remainder that he didn't know was even there started to push its way through the knuckles and became this weird fossilized thing that came out of his knuckles. And when I saw that, and I had seen what was going on with me, and I'd heard some other people's stories, I really thought, okay, there's something special here. So because I had the Wellness Center, I actually did trials with people over a year and a half. We did 8-week trials, and I had a lot of people, just under 100 people. Every single person's energy improved. And the very, very healthy, like the athletes, they found that incremental little bit of energy that they needed, all the way to a person who I've talked about quite a lot, and he's always open to me sharing. He had stage 4 cancer. He lived in Coromandel, which is kind of far, and we had a mutual friend. So I sent him a lot of water because he decided, rather than go, before he went down the chemo track, he wanted to see if he could help heal himself. So he was working on himself, doing all the internal work, which we can never disregard. It is so important on your healing journey. But he did a 27-day water fast, no food, and only drank this water. And he said that around day 10, he was so energized and he felt like it was a liquid food. And what was extraordinary is that halfway through the fast, he had to go to the hospital because he had a checkup. They found his tumor had reduced by half, but the doctors were still very, very concerned about this fasting he was doing, even though there was such a significant improvement, and they were trying to convince him to stop. And he said, "Don't be ridiculous. It's working. I'm not stopping." And on day after he finished, I think it was 2 weeks after the fast finished, he had another test. They couldn't find any cancer in his body, and they still can't. And we saw that with 3 other people, men and women, different types of cancers, but he did the longest fast. So this was a really interesting thing. Another interesting aspect we noticed was that across the board, everybody's eyesight improved. So what's quite interesting is that because our eye lens is 99% water, and it's such a high source of it, our body is craving that kind of water. And there's a book called Water Codes written by a friend of mine called Dr. Carly Nuday that I wrote a chapter in called The Synergy of Salt and Water. And she talks about eyesight in there. And she shares that as we age, one of the reasons that we begin to lose our eyesight is that our body will pull from the highest source of structured, ordered water that we have, which outside of sexual fluids like sperm is the eye lens. And so that's quite interesting because your body would kind of makes this decision, like you don't need to see that well, but your heart needs to keep working. This XYZ needs to keep working. So it's a slow process, but it's one of the many reasons that we sometimes lose our eyesight. And so to see this lady, one lady in particular, I'm thinking of, she had to change the prescription on her eyeglasses because she started to improve. It helped 2 ladies that I can specifically think of who had been trying to get pregnant. And one lady had done 2 rounds of IVF and got pregnant within the first month of drinking this water. So I noticed this huge amount of improvements in people. And I realized it wasn't just me. And I think there are various medicine waters around the world. I do not think this is the only one. I began to, yes, and people are asking, is there anything like it available? Well, that old guy sold the property and I had no more access to it. So when people ask me, I always felt bad. But I've recently just come into touch with a guy called Ross, who lives about 1.5 miles up the road. The aquifer is this huge underwater lake, and it's got a bedrock of crystal, of quartz. And so I actually have his details that I've been sharing with people so they can go and reach out to him. He's doing his best to start getting it overseas. But it's a family run, thing. It's just this one little guy. He's really sweet.
Does it
but
have the same high pH as?
a pH of 9.5. It always will slightly change depending on the bedrock it sits in. But we've been drinking it and we've all noticed the purging, the gentle cleanse, if you will, has already begun, which is an indicator. You have to be able to see a difference. Like the proof's in the pudding. We can convince ourselves we're drinking the best water in the world, but if we're not seeing any change, I think that might be a telltale sign. It is an artisan deep underwater aquifer. So it's a very unique, I think it's nearly 300 meters down. So one of the things that a lot of people have asked me about is water that has been exposed to, what's it called, Seth, when they had the nuclear, when they had the nuclear explosion leak in Japan.
Fukushima.
Yeah.
The seawater, the way the...
What was the thing that came off? I mean, radiation. So there's a certain amount of radiation in external waters. It's a minute amount, and not all of them have it, of course, but it is being found still now. And so the waters that have come right down through deep underwater aquifers will not have that. And we've tested it and it doesn't have it. And so, you know, you look at what the unique properties of holy waters are, and it's usually, they all tend to have dissolved molecular hydrogen, which is one of their healing properties. So I've seen that it has some of that, but I'm not trying to do a big plug for this water. It's actually not what I want to talk about.
Well, but also too, not to like side rally you here, but you know, the idea of machine produced alkaline municipal water has been so heavily pushed in people's face by these big water companies. And what you're talking about isn't that. And
no,
I love that you differentiate that.
There's a lady called Isabel Friend who we do a lot of work together. And on my website, I think it's the second question, where the question that I get asked is, have I heard of Kangen? And so I give a link to her video, which is comprehensive. It shares all the science around why she's very concerned about the Kangen machines. For me personally, with this really open-minded and move towards eating organic, spray-free, all these different kinds of things, to go towards a machine-made water, if you will, seems rather strange, because I do believe that nature knows exactly what to do. The other issue that I've found with the ionizing machines, and I've done a lot of tests with them because I'm able to compare a naturally high alkaline water to an ionized high alkaline water, is that they are not stable, whereas a naturally alkaline water is. So when you're testing for pH, and you can test the pH of the ionized water and the pH, maybe 9.9 water, or let's say it's a 10 and a 10. One will stay stable at that pH for literally years. Sometimes it might, I've got one from that same water source I had for 7 years. It only dropped by 2. So it went from a 9.9 to a 9.7 after 7 years in a dark container in a cupboard. That's really interesting. Whereas when you test for ionized water, especially if they are both left open to the air, that's what I recommend you try. The real test is if you open them to the air so that it can, you know, have that exposure to the air, you will see that ionized water begins to drop. Some of them even start dropping within 20 minutes to start to reduce back to their original pH. So a lot of them talk about ORP, which stands for oxidation reduction potential. And it's the way in which you can tell two things. One is that whether it has a negative charge and whether it is like an antioxidant or whether it is an oxidant. So if it's a positive charge, it's an oxidant. If it's got a negative charge and if it's got a negative ORP meter reading, not only is it negative charged, but it's an antioxidant. So whenever I've tested waters coming straight out of their natural sources, they tend to always have a negative charge. But this water that I tested it for has a negative 297. But the people that make ionizing machines talk about, oh, this is how we know it's so special. It's an antioxidant. Look, you can test for the ORP. But again, when you test for ORP, and it's stated on some of their websites even, it will drop. And so there is that interesting aspect that this is a man-made water, if you will. It's an altered water. The only benefit that I think is found in ionizing machines is that it creates molecular hydrogen, which can be tested. So that's where people might be having some benefit. But what happens is it destroys the original structures of the water. And you're using tap water, and it doesn't actually filter everything out. Even though it has a filter, the filter's not efficient enough to actually get rid of everything. So that's all. I really recommend people look up Isabel Friend, go to my website, vedaustin.com, go to the frequently asked questions and just watch the video. It's very, very in-depth, and she can do a much better job than me because my area of expertise is really in crystallography and what I've seen. So I've seen that the ionizing machines do, from the work that I've done, they have kind of destroyed the structure. Any water can be improved through conscious expression, though. So that's there. But we need to look what we're looking at. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I want to kind of get back to the journey. So there's a lot to be said about the ionizing machines. I think that there are other options. And if you watch that video, she talks about them. So I'm going to move ahead from that. So I started to go, what's in this water, or what makes this water so special? You know, why is it so different? And I started doing what a lot of people would do if they were scientifically minded. That would be to look at the analysis. This is a very logical thing to do. And I realized after a while, yes, it's got, you know, high bicarb, and it's got this silica and blah, 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 dissolved solids. I'm like, you know, this is only telling me what water holds. What do I actually know about this water? What is water? You know, because when we're discussing water, we're discussing what is in the water. We're not discussing what water is. And I think that's an extremely important question to ask oneself, given that by molecular count, we're 99% of it. So I began asking that question. And then when you look at Tesla, and he says, if you want to know the secrets to the universe, you know, look at frequency, energy, vibration. I'm like, well, how can I tell that? What can I do? So at that time, that's when Emoto's work was coming out. Now, it's interesting because Emoto wasn't embraced by the scientific community for a few reasons. The main one was that he openly shared that he cherry-picked his photos to display what he was trying to say about water, which does not say that he was wrong, but that's also not very scientific. So he opened the doorway for millions of people to see themselves as sensitive bodies of water, sensitive to thoughts and words and environment. I'm just going to move slightly because the sun is moving.
Yeah.
Hey, Veda, just for everybody else's benefit too, can you, all right, the as far as I know, the pH level is standard, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say standard, but I do a lot of distilling of water, and that pH level is right around, like, I think 7.0, 7.1. So for everybody else's benefit also, when you're talking about like a high pH level, can you give everybody a little detail on that?
Distilled water should be a 7. So distilled water should be a 7. Anything under that is considered to be acidic, and anything over that is considered to be alkaline. And there are safe amounts of alkaline and not safe amounts of alkaline. I wouldn't tend to do anything over a 10 of alkalinity. I think that's getting a little bit too much. You want to find balance. Like, I also like to drink in my daily life, I like to drink water that's around about in a high 7 to an 8 as well. You know, I don't only drink that water. So I think of that as a medicine water. Anything that's acidic, there's a lot of acidic waters, and a lot of municipal tap water is acidic. It becomes acidic based on what's in it. So if you think about a high alkaline water, it's high alkaline because it has bicarb in it. So if you have bicarbonate of soda, if you want to make your water more alkaline, and you can just get the best water you have, which maybe is like a 7.5 or something, and you have a glass of water, you can put half a teaspoon of baking soda into your water, and it will bring the pH immediately up to about an 8.3, which is around about the pH of baking soda. And there's been studies, this doctor, he actually, bless you, Bill, he injects cancer cells, cancer, with baking soda and attracts them with maple syrup. So years ago that I remember reading about this doctor, but he was having a lot of success. So there's some real powers in the simplicity even of baking soda. So so hopefully that's helpful.
Aluminum free, yeah. Make sure there's no aluminum in it.
Yeah. So I kind of want to move on from the different types of water to drink, because I think the crystallography is getting into a more spiritual or more philosophical, more conscious aspect. And I think that's where I'd love to talk, because that's what my water work is really all about. So I'm going to just go back to my screen share. Okay, so as we know, that's happened to me. Oh, another curious thing about it, though, is that I noticed that ants were really attracted to it. Ants are really attracted to magnetic fields and electricity, which isn't why they're quite attracted to our computers sometimes. And so when I was living in Omaha, which is a place in New Zealand, we were on tank water, which is rainwater, and I'd feed my cat the rainwater. And one day all the power went out, so we couldn't get it. So I fed him the water I was drinking. And the ants were just obsessed with his food for the most part, always interested in his food. I was always having to clean it out. But they absolutely ignored the food and went straight to the water and built little ant rafts on the water. So they were really interested in the water. Another interesting aspect of the water, any living water, really, and by living water, I'm not suggesting that water is dead. I'm using this word because it's a kind of way in which we understand a way of describing water that's just come out of the ground and is very kind of vibrant. So this kind of water is very sensitive to artificial light, so or any light. So what I did was put some of that water into a see-through container and left it outside for 2 weeks, and an algae started to grow, which it should. But when we tested the algae, we found out that it actually was a rare type of spirulina that was growing. So that was really interesting. So people that are collecting this water, I always recommend to keep it out of the light, because it should be sensitive. It's a common and normal thing for it to be. So this was just an interesting thing I threw in. It's like I've always found it interesting that heart cancer is one of the rarest types of cancers on the planet, because the blood flowing from the lungs into the heart has the highest pH and the lowest and the highest oxygen levels within the entire body. So I'm going to squiz past these. We can get back to them at another time if you want. So here is these are really helpful if anyone wants to write them down. You can look at various different things on Isabel's website, and the website, and sorry, the email underneath, Ross, that's the guy I send people to if they want to purchase the water that helped to heal my body.
But he's not shipping it out of country yet,
Yeah,
right?
he will be within the next few months. Yeah.
Okay,
He's
great.
doing his best. Since I did one post about it, he has been flooded literally with thousands of people overseas wanting to get it. So Emoto's work is very much in contrast. I think that's important to also note, that humans seem to be very interested in things that are contrasting, the best and the worst of things. But that's not always real life. Real life is often a lot of things in between. And I'm interested in the whole story, not the two opposite ends of a story. But also when my son saw Emoto's work, he saw the heavy metal example next to the classical music example. So if you were to look at it through the lens of a child, you might think, oh, water only likes classical music, therefore it hates heavy metal. Well, I don't think that water at any stretch of the imagination is in judgment. There is a very special word in Maori, which is called wairua. It means spirit. It means the two waters, the physical and the spiritual waters. The physical waters, they flow through us, they hydrate us, they have function. The spiritual water, which I think is a very real thing, is more akin to the air or the ether, and it is very attracted to electrical charge, which we'll get into. But it is, in my opinion, the observer. And we have the ability to observe ourselves. Even people that have had near-death experiences, they have said that they have had experiences of being able to observe their bodies being resuscitated with no attachment or even recognition that that used to be them. So they literally became the observer. Anyone who has had psychedelic experiences may have had an experience of being the observer. And it's a very interesting aspect that even in day-to-day life, we can observe ourselves. When I am upset about something, I actually use it as a tool, whereas I observe myself being upset and I literally ask myself, when was the first time you felt like that? And it's a very helpful thing because I allow myself to have the feeling, but watch myself whilst I'm having it, and we can all do that. So I said to my son, because he came to me and he said, water hates me. I'm like, what? My child thinks that? No way. And he said, yeah, because I like Tupac. I want to listen to rap. I don't want to listen to heavy metal, and I don't want to listen to classical music. And he said, Tupac swears, therefore water hates me because it doesn't like swearing. I'm like, well, I think that Emoto was, whoever was doing the test with heavy metal probably didn't like it. And I said, look, water's not judging. It's absorbing information and it's sharing it. So it's interesting. So if I leave a room, which is how I've done my entire plethora of music, where I play a song, I leave the room, I come back and I freeze it. So I'm not emotionally involved in the song. And I think it's very helpful because what we've observed is that water crystallizes into a picture of something relative to a word in the song. It likes words. It's really interesting because words are very, very powerful. And we're going to get into that more. So that's what I'm saying. A lot of what Emoto was saying around water being sensitive to thoughts and words is true. It's just, we see things in different ways. So I used lots of genres of music to see what it would do. And I learned a lot from that. The second person who inspired me was this man. His name is Laurent Costa. He is a French microscopic photographer. His method of flash freezing water after it was exposed to something was like Emoto's, but the only thing water was exposed to was an observer. For Laurent, he did not want to experiment on water because he considers water to be his spiritual teacher. He wanted to simply watch water and to see what water wanted to share with him. But sometimes he would smile at the water before he flash froze it. And you can see that water smiled back at him here. Now, he wrote a book called Journey into the Heart of Water. And he has this beautiful quote, which I just really love, which says that the heart of water opens up to those that love it. And what's so unique about this is that these are pictures, they're not geometries. So when we see geometries, we kind of feel a certain way. People are very attracted to sacred geometry. Of course, it makes up the whole universe. But pictures, like art, make us feel differently than that. There is something very unique and, if you want to say human, about art. When you go back into the caveman times, the way that they talked and shared information, that shared huge concepts, was through art. So when I saw this, I can't help but smile because I'm like, this is so cute. And what inspired me was that I'm a researcher, yes, but I'm interested in science, yes, but I'm very much an artist because I worked professionally as an oil painter for 15 years. So I'm, as we all are, multifaceted, but art really inspires me. So the third person who inspired me to begin this work with water was this man, Thomas Hieronymus. He was a radionic engineer. Turns out, if you really go into the certain amount of research about him, he actually was quite the genius and was working with scalar waves a very, very long time ago. And so he made a very interesting observation that when he went into a Parisian meat market, he observed that the freshly placed organs of an animal appeared to be affecting the way the frost froze on the glass behind where they were placed. For example, the frost would freeze into the shape of a liver organ above a liver organ, and so on and so forth. So his hypothesis was that there seemed to be some kind of life force energy still emanating out of the organs, even though they weren't attached to an animal anymore. And he put that down to there being water in the blood. Now, each organ has something called a sonic signature. It's kind of like a cymatic imprint of the function and shape of the organ. So because it was very cold and because the blood was still fresh, and we're going to get into water and spirit later, so this will make more sense, so I'll bring it back as a reference. The information that was held in that blood through the water was sharing the information of that sonic signature to the water in the air, which then froze as it hit the glass into the form. And this is what he thought. And I thought that was fascinating because he was seeing that with his naked eye. And Rudolf Steiner suggests that you look at the way the frost freezes on a butcher's window compared to that of a florist's, and you'll see it's very different. So I wanted to see if water had memory. I didn't know if it was real. I recommend people try stuff out for themselves rather than believe everything that they read, which is why
now you teach it too, which is an incredibly amazing offering that you're willing to do that, you know?
Well,
So,
I think it's really important and it's really fun.
yeah, I know you do.
So I wanted to see. So what I did was that I thought, well, I have a glass petri dish. I was working on another project. I have some water that healed my body. But I've used many waters. So people always say, do you only have to use that kind of water? No, you can use any kind of water you want because water wants to communicate all the time in any way. And so, but the only water I found personally doesn't create really significant imagery tends to be distilled water. And that's because it lacks the salts and minerals. It's interesting. So distilled water is more like the observer, whereas spring water is more like the observer, but also the active participant, more like us. We can actively participate in the world, but also observe ourselves and our surroundings. Distilled water just doesn't seem to do the same thing, although it has a signature pattern. So I've discovered that water communicates in 3 types of ways: a signature pattern, an artistic expression, and hydroglyphs, which we're going to cover soon. So my work, what I did was I held a petri dish of water, and I thought, I'm going to project a thought by thinking a thought into the water. I'm going to freeze it, because the secret seemed in all 3 examples I just gave to be in the freezing, where the unseen becomes seen. And so I held the dish. I saw a bit of fluff floating around in there. I was like, oh my God. So I put my hand in and pulled out fluff, consciously thinking, I wonder if my hand will have any impact on the water's memory. Put it into the freezer with the peas and the broccoli and everything, and forgot about it for a few hours. Came back. This was way back then, because I've been doing this 10 years. I need to update my website. It says 8 there, but you know, it was completely frozen solid. So I pulled it out, held it up to the light, and I took a photo. And the photo on the right here is the first photo I ever took. And it is undeniably a hand, and it looks like an X-ray of my hand. And it took up half of the petri dish. My petri dishes are the size of my hand, so it's about 10 centimeters in diameter. I don't know what that is in inches, sorry. And it kind of freaked me out when I first saw it, because I'm like, oh my God, it's a hand. I was not expecting to see that at all, and it was kind of took me aback. And then I thought, well, if any water is going to be naturally informed, surely it would be the ocean. So I went and I got some water from the sea, froze a very thin layer, and got this. And you can see out there's the outline of the fish, the tail, the gills, the eye, the fins. It's got this feathery outlook because seawater, compared to water with salt in it, freezes differently than fresh water, and it looks more feathery like this when you freeze it solid. So that's really when my freezer became my most used household appliance, and I started doing this nonstop for nearly a year until I became in this way, until I became very aware of the new science of water. And my friend, Dr. Gerald Pollack, who has written a book called The Fourth Phase of Water, shares that there are 4 types of water, stages, phases of water. I mean, there's a liquid, solid, gas, and then a type of gel or plasma. Now, Seth earlier talked about the water in our cells. So the water in our cells is this 4th phase water. Its body converts H2O into H3O2, and it has unique properties. It absorbs more light. It is more viscous. It has negative charge, which is important because healthy cells are negatively charged. Unhealthy cells tend to be positively charged. And it has a slightly higher pH. Now, it also has an ordered molecular structure, which is very similar to a crystal, except that it is fluid because it's water. So it's called a liquid crystal. So that is the terminology in the scientific world of what is structured water. So I think it's very important to talk about what we're seeing in this work, which we will in a minute. So I thought, well, this is very interesting. We're seeing art here. Now, you know, where else do we see art outside of nature creating art? We are all the entire world is a creative piece of art, of course, but what creatures can design? I mean, I've seen some elephants do some pictures and I've seen some dogs do some things, but outside of that, we are very, very known for our artistic expressions, for our art galleries, for our architecture, for our designs. So art is a very sophisticated way of communicating. So this is the difference between my old technique and my new technique. So I have, and many other people have used all different types of inspirations prior to freezing. So the image on the right was projected by my son Rama. His father's part Indian, so his name is named after Lord Rama, the Hindu god. And Lord Rama always has a bow and arrow. And so Rama was trying to con me into getting him a bow and arrow. And he said, if I can project a bow and arrow into the water, Mum, and if we see something to do with a bow and arrow, will you buy me one? And I'm like, oh my God. And so I was like, okay. And so he did this entire thing himself and he took the photo. So it really does show a huge difference. Now, what is the difference? There's a massive difference between these two. One is a totally frozen sample of water. One is partially frozen. So as I became more and more, as I said, familiar with the new science of water, Jerry Pollack talks about you can find that 4th phase water as water's beginning to freeze, but before it's frozen, and as it's beginning to melt before it's liquid. So I started to open my freezer earlier and earlier to see, oh, when is the water actually beginning to freeze? And I discovered that at around 5-minute mark, there is liquid on top and ice underneath. So what I would do is I took my sample out, tipped the liquid water away, and voila, I see this crystallography, which has only a couple of millimeters thick, but it is so much detail, so much clarity, and there is so much light that comes through. So when people say, how come your pictures are different colors? It's because I love to play with the light and the light in the background's colors. So that's one of the reasons you see so much clarity in the new work. So this is kind of, this is just some examples of more hands and more things that I've done. So I held a feather. So the influence really, my intention was that it pick up the feather, but water showed me actually holding the feather. The other one, I put some Reiki energy into the water, but it showed me doing it. The other one, I just held my hand over the water and you can see it showed that too. So this is what it should look like in the freezer, where there's liquid around the ice. So it doesn't look like a totally solid kind of thing of water, because it's not a solid ice yet. It's in a liquid crystal stage, which I think is why we get such incredible imagery. And this is what it should look like where you tip it away. So there are 3 stages of freezing. 1 is the stage I remove the water at. 2 is where water creates like this ice sandwich where there's liquid water in the middle. When there's liquid water in the middle, you know you've overfrozen it. And then there are these kind of bubbles that form and then it froze as a solid. So that might be more familiar if you've ever seen a solid block of ice. So we want to get the stage where it hasn't created 2 layers with liquid in between yet. So a very clever man, I'm just going to stop this. So he is one of the many thousands of people that know how to do this work now. And he put a camera into his freezer and filmed it from beginning to end so we can watch the stages of freezing. This is really helpful when you want to actually give this technique a go. So what you're first going to see, and I'll stop it at that time. I just want to move this little thing up here somewhere. Okay. I'll move it up to here. Okay, so we're going to push this. So what we're seeing here is the first freeze happening. And it was happening a little slower than I would have liked, but there we go. I have one that actually works a little bit faster. Okay, right here is the first freeze. Okay, the next thing we're going to see is water, which is kind of washing away the patterns here, only leaving a few that you can see. And from the top down, you're going to see these kind of bubbles, these dark bubbles that come from the top down. That's actually the water that's stuck between the 2 layers of ice. So because this is the slower version, I do have a faster one. I might fast forward through this just a bit. Otherwise, it's a little bit like watching paint dry. So here we go. So we can start to see the washing. If I can grab it. Oh, hang on, I'll just come back.
Water's not an issue with technology currently.
It does. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do it the other way around. I have the other one set up. So we'll do that. This is going to work better. Okay, we'll do the quick one. Okay, so this is the first freeze. Then we have the second freeze, which is that washing down the bottom. It's kind of washing it all away. And up the top, you see these dark bubbles coming down. That's actually water that's in between the 2 layers of ice, although it doesn't look like it. And then what you end up getting is this kind of hole that starts to kind of close. And then it finally closes and then it cracks. So you can see how much darker that it is to this. So I am amazed when I look at my work now that I actually got imagery at that stage. So water really, really broke it through to be able to design in the way that it did for me. So that always surprises me, given that it is so incredible. So where are we? We'll go here to be able to see that. So I've talked about the 3 ways that water communicates. So I said there is a signature pattern. Here are 4 signature patterns. This is the signature pattern of spring water. It tends to form beautiful hexagonal patterns that I call star hexagons because they look like a star. They have a fern off each leg and they create a hexagonal pattern. That is the blueprint pattern of water. The rain pattern looks like a kind of fanning pattern with a curve. Filtered water has lots of little compacted lines, and municipal water looks rather disordered with lots of lines and dots. Now, the lines and dots are interesting when you start to watch how water degrades. So this is water straight out of a spring with frozen within half an hour. And as it starts to degrade, it kind of, there's 2 ways. One in which they start to open up, that star opens up and ends up becoming this little kind of hexagon shape, but that actually ends up being a dot. Over here, we have that kind of star hexagon. The fern will come off, become an individual fern. That will start to mutate, end up becoming these grassy shapes. This ends up becoming a line. You end up with lines and dots. That's what municipal tap water is. So here are some examples of signature patterns artistic expression, and hydroglyphs. A hydroglyph is a symbol in ice that I have identified by doing a lot of repeated studies. This is one of the only reasons that the science community is really interested in this work, because I've been able to get so many repeated studies with it. So I use words as my form of communication with hydroglyphs. So I will write a word. So water doesn't read words, and it doesn't only read English, but I'll write a word. It absorbs the energy of the word and crystallizes into the energy of a word. And to say I have one hydroglyph, I need to have seen the same symbol appear at least 50 times. And I began that work because when my son was talking about music and everything, I wanted to show him that water wasn't in judgment. And with doing lots of genres of music, I noticed that there were always words that it would design something for. So when I used the song Stairway to Heaven, I kept seeing a stairway glyph all the time. And so I ended up writing the word stairway, and it kept showing me the same glyph. And then I thought, well, after 50 times, what is that glyph? What does it mean? Like, what does it mean, stairway? What do you do with a stairway? So relative to the song, I wrote the words climb up. And it's interesting, it only works for the word climb, two words climb up and not climb down. So that's interesting. So we only get this stairway glyph for climb up, not climb down. So that evolved. Anyway, and I'll talk more about hydroglyphs and show you 64 examples of some of them. So I think of my technique like a glue and glitter picture. Your conscious expression is the glue. The water that adheres to the glue of your consciousness is the first freeze. The water that you tip away is like the glitter that you shake away. So I wanted to see, since water really loved to design an imagery, if it could recognize people's faces. So I would place a petri dish of water over a photo. This is my friend Wendy. She's become the face of water because this is such an iconic photo. And I put it on for 30 seconds, remove and freeze using my technique. And you can see it clearly designed her face. But I thought, well, maybe that's a one-off, as many people could easily think. So I used lots of faces, not just photos, but pictures of statues, even coins. So you can see that even here, you can see the side of the dish. This image of Sadhguru is actually really large. I overfroze the water slightly here. Different waters can freeze at different times. It's always a process in the freezing methods. And you can kind of see all of the similarities that have gone on here. So this is water that I took from my tribal water, which is the Waikato River in New Zealand. And you can see that there is the nose, the face, a kind of beard, and this very common top knot type of hair being pulled back that the Maori warriors would often, how they would wear their hair, very similar in some ways to some of the American Indian. So that was pretty special. So here are some examples of my work. Everyone has a story. I'll only share some of them or else we'll be here for 9 million hours. So the dog was smelling the petri dish of water, and I love this one because it just designed the nose. My cat Jiva, here he is, looking very cute. He'd often look in the water and try and actually get something out of the water. So the water designed his face. Down here, it looks like an etching. I was at a cafe and I saw a Schnauzer dog that was drinking out of this dog bowl they'd left out for thirsty dogs. And so I asked the lady if she would give me a takeaway cup so I could take some dog bowl water away. And she must have literally thought, I tried to tell her I was a crystallographer and what I was doing. I think she still thinks I'm crazy. But anyway, I got some and I froze it, just went home, froze it, and it designed really a remarkable image. As you continue on, we'll start to see that water isn't a photocopier. Water is actually using its building blocks of ice to design its own interpretation. Now, that is a very interesting, sophisticated thing to be doing. Down here, I asked a woman who was pregnant in the early stages of pregnancy to think of her baby and leave me some of the water she drank from. And I asked her to do that. So she did. And here you can see the outline of the baby. But what's interesting is that you can see it's a really glowing white, this light. And I have various masterclasses. Each one has a different theme. And a couple of masterclasses ago, I interviewed a man called Dr. Mauro Zapatera, Mauro Zapatera. Highly recommend you look him up. He's a fascinating guy. He's a Harvard doctor, and he is literally saying that the cerebrospinal fluid is the portal to cosmic consciousness. It's 99% water, and when we sleep, it bathes our brain and moves like the ocean coming into the beach, back and forth and back and forth. And we can move the spinal fluid up just by deep breathing. And so he gets right into that, which is really interesting. So just to see this spine highlighted there at this very early stage fascinated me. As you can see, there are things that seem a little bit unusual, which might be like, why would you do Batman? But I didn't, because my children play so much of a part in this work that my son, he's 15 now, but he used to like to do it when he was a little bit younger, and he would like just sit down on the couch and with a petri dish of water and watch a movie and then freeze it. So over here is kind of an interesting one. The water was exposed to a video that someone had sent me. That I often have petri dishes water just sitting around, and so it was sitting by my computer, and I just watched it, and it was of this poor pig that had escaped out of a truck being taken to the meatworks, and it was okay, and some people came and collected it, and it's having its forever life now. But water designed the outline of the pig very, very clearly. But if you actually look, there's another pig over here. And here's his ear and his back and his head and his snout and his mouth and his eye. If you zoom in a little bit, you can just really see he's right there. And so what's interesting about that is that it's not the first time that water has shown me things that I didn't see, or that we didn't see in videos or in other situations, which I've got an example coming up. So what's curious about this is that I suspect there was another pig trying to follow the first, and water knew that. So here we have some more examples. Here I put a physical flower in the water. I removed it and it designed it. I used the water from this broccoli water, which designed the broccoli. Here I actually put the water on top of a wedding invitation, and the word wedding marriage was the most predominant word on the invitation. I put it here because it looks so much like a wedding ring. What was interesting though is that by doing that helped me start using the word marriage, and now we have another hydroglyph, which is the ring, which is a symbol for the energy of the word marriage, as well as sacred union, because they have layers of meaning. Now, here I put my thumb into the water and took it out, obviously, and then froze it. But you might notice there's a chip in the nail here. Well, I chipped my thumbnail in exactly the same place 3 hours after doing that test, which I thought was really interesting.
Premonition, right? It's basically showing.
Yeah, I don't think water is in a state of time like we are. I think that that's a whole nother talk.
Yeah,
totally. But I'll just leave it at that. Here's another example though, where I put the influence was the knife. I just put the butter knife on there, but these two coasters weren't part of it, but water showed that it saw them, if you will. And I think that's interesting. Now, this one's interesting and quite a recent one. As I mentioned, I was an artist and I like looking at other people's art. So this is a South African artist. She did lots of birds. And so I stared at her picture for about a minute, then closed my eyes, then turned and looked at the petri dish of water for a period of time, about a minute, and then froze it. And you can see there is some very interesting similarities there. So words, can water design words? Now this is kind of getting to a slightly next level aspect, and this is some of the stuff I'm actually sharing in my book. Now, sometimes a lot of this can be a bit much for some people, especially when you start to see some of the work I'm about to show you. But I always recommend to people that really struggle with the idea that maybe water is not just reacting, but responding in an intelligent manner, to see it as art. When you see something as art, you get to ask yourself, what does it mean to me? As opposed to like, how is this possible? How is this done? This is whatever. You kind of can just see it in a newer way. So I used the song. I played the song Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra, and water designed the word fly. I sent love to the water, it wrote love. I said hi to the water, it said hi. Here I asked water if it knew my name. Now, this was never shown to the water, but this is how I link my initials when I write them. This is my initials in ice. I've actually repeated that and seen water design my initials 3 or 4 times more. But here is an interesting one that I recently shared on Instagram and Facebook. And I asked water if it knew my Indian names. So I have 2 given Indian names, Veda, as most people know, but my middle name is Karan, which is Arjuna's brother's name from the Bhagavad Gita. So rather than writing the VA, it designed the VK. And up here, it looks a lot like Hindi. So that was very, very interesting. So I'm not the only one that can do this. I have been teaching this technique to thousands of people, and here are some of their work. So this was one of the first people who ever learned how to do it. She works at Dr. Pollock's lab, actually, my friend Laura, and she put the water by a bowl of fruit, which was mainly apples, and you can see how similar that looks. Now, other than this one, the rest are by children. This little boy was obsessed with tarantulas. And so he had a pet tarantula, and he put the water in the tarantula cage, and it designed this little guy. This one, the child was doing a study on big cats and got that. This little girl had a mouse, and she took the water from the mouse's water container and designed the little mouse. This is my daughter Shanti's. She used to be obsessed with unicorns. So you can see the horn, the mane, the eye, the face. Looks like something out of the movie Lost. Not Lost. I've just been watching that. So I just finished Lost after millions of years of actually watching it, but no, out of Frozen. And then this one's interesting because, of course, why would you want to use nail clippers as your influence? But I am John, who lives in Utah, where it gets very cold. He is as prolific as I am, and he freezes all his water, or not a lot of his water, actually outside. So he's watching it freeze, which is really great, using the same technique, but watching it freeze. And so he had nail clippers sitting beside his petri dish of water just before it froze, and it designed them. It's been very helpful working with people around the world like him, who are actually seeing it freeze outside, because now we know for sure that it's not because of the way the freezer freezes things. We know that there's certain repeatable patterns that we've seen that freeze outside, so we know that they're naturally forming. So here are some more. This one might not be as obvious, but it is when you zoom in. His little nose here, his head, his face, and his paws. I think the rest are fairly obvious. This one's special. My friend Natasha, who lives in Slovenia, she was one of the first people starting to do this work. And she had 2 dogs. One of her dogs passed away, and this dog here was quite sick. And all week she'd been worried about her dog. But she went ahead and she did some crystallography, and she asked water to show her some tulips, the flowers. But when it showed her dog, she was so taken aback. And she immediately contacted me and she said, why did water show me my dog and not tulips? And I said, because water doesn't do small talk. Water is far more interested in what you're feeling than what you're thinking. And this by far has been true, because water is wild. It's choosing to design. It's not doing it because you tell it to. In fact, the moment you start telling, if I start telling water to do something, or assuming I even know what it's going to do, it won't do it. This is one of the more difficult aspects of my work when it comes to science, outside of hydroglyphs, because it's a very unique and special thing to get to have a relationship with water. And I want to talk about what is water. Now, this is really, really important. I was the very last speaker at the banquet at the annual water conference in Germany last year, and I've been asked to speak again in Amsterdam this year in October. So I shared this story with a bunch of physicists and doctors and scientists and biologists, and I was a little nervous because it's more of an indigenous story. But when they heard it, there was this kind of aha moment, and people keep having it when I tell the story, and I also had it. So this woman told me that she could speak to bees and that she would watch their hives for long periods of time. And eventually a bee came out and communicated to her and said, we don't mind you watching our hives, but please don't look at it for so long, because your conscious expression is putting too much light in the hive and we like it to be darker. It's like, oh, so where you put your conscious expression is also where you put your light. And every now and then, when I open the freezer at exactly the right time, I'm able to see, just as water's beginning to freeze, it will often send out these little spears, but I can see this light emanating out of them. And someone on my beginner's workshop managed to capture this actually just a day or two ago. And so I think it's actually light that paves the way for the design of the crystallography. And I think it's a way in which information is shared. Now, I was speaking to a friend of mine who's helping me work on a paper, who's a quantum physicist. And I asked this very important question, which I think is a very important question for all of us to ask. Liquid water updates its information every trillionth of a second. If it is so rapidly moving, how the heck is it picking up on anything to do with consciousness or environment? And that is what a lot of the common standard science world will say. This is bollocks, because water is chaos. Liquid water is chaos. How is it? It can't be possible. But he said something. He said, there's a really big difference between chaos, molecular chaos, and molecular excitement. He said, when you're excited about something, there is something you're excited about. He said, forming this relationship with water. Now, any relationship we have with anybody involves water and light, because we are water and light, and water absorbs photons. It's not just oxygen and hydrogen, it's also a vast amount of photons, which is light. So I think that this is a really important piece that I discovered through my work. Now, I want to talk about potential. So here we have a sunflower seed, but it didn't design the seed, it designed the whole sunflower. Here we have a shell with no information inside the shell, it only designed the shell. This is very interesting. So I'm going to read this because it's part of my book and I think it's very interesting. So just like a computer, there must be information to extract. So in this case, the information of the sunflower seed would have pulled from the ether, dictating the potential within the seed as a sunflower. And in quantum mechanics, this is called potentials or virtual particles, which act as a blueprint for future growth. And in the bottom one, we can see that without the information which stores the blueprint for growth, the potential isn't displayed. And I've seen this happen with seeds multiple times. So I want to talk about this guy, Gennady Krokalev. I have talked about him a lot, and I think he's so interesting. I'm often trying to share information that's somehow relative to my work. And so this has some relevance, and it's a fascinating story. So I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to share the pictures because they're amazing. So the guy that talks about CFS, his name is Dr. Mauro Zapatera. I'm just reading the thing. Mauro Zapatera. So Gennady Krokalev, he is a Russian scientist and psychotherapist or psychiatrist, and he worked with psychiatric patients who were having hallucinations. And what's really interesting is that Gennady's brother gave him this article that was written by a physicist saying that he thinks it is possible that the retina of the eye can project images that can be picked up on camera. Now, going back even further, that guy was inspired by this French photographer, who accidentally took a mind picture. And it's a really weird story. And it's inspired 2 horror movies, actually.
Oh,
but anyway, so this early guy that eventually was one of the people that inspired Gennady, it was in the early stage when black and white film was just coming out and you'd had to develop the film in the water. So this guy had gone to a party and he got rip-roaring drunk, I guess, and he was feeling terrible. And the next day he had to get up early because he had to go and develop these photos for a client. And he would take portraits of people. And he was feeling, I don't know what he'd done at the party, but he'd had this awful nightmare, this terrifying nightmare. And as he was in the dark room, he started to have a bit of a hallucination and started to think he saw this creature that was in his nightmare. And this was at the same time as developing the photo. And as he actually took the photo out and it developed, rather than see a picture of his client, he saw this image from his mind. And so what Gennady did was that he ended up creating this kind of goggles with no lens, and he attached it to the box of a camera called a Zenith camera, which has this kind of box thing that comes out of it. And as the patient was having a hallucination, he would take photographs, and he was photographing the retina of their eyes. So light wasn't coming into this box. So he did this with over 200 patients, and there were 117 of them that could confirm that the images that appeared on the camera were in fact what they were seeing. Now, what's even more interesting is that this was repeated in the last 15 years by more Russian scientists, but rather than use people with psychiatric issues, they used someone who could remote view. And what they did was they used the same setup, same camera, except they used a scuba diving mask that they took the lens out. It worked better for them. And the scientists stood behind a wall and held up numbers and held up shapes. And as this remote viewer tuned in to have a picture in her mind's eye, then they would capture the picture. And they were able to see the shapes and the numbers appear in black and white film. So I'm going to show you some pictures. So there were 2 hypotheses on this. So one was that there is a secondary layer of information that is not as, I think Gennady was more for that idea. That means there's a secondary realm of things that we can't see, but maybe are there. The second idea is more accepted by, I don't know, that these scientists absolutely believe. They wrote they actually did a documentary, and I think it's called Thought is Material, It's Proven, or something like that. It's in Russian with pretty bad subtitles and talking over it. But if you can suffer through that, or if you speak Russian, even better for you, they've done a whole big documentary on it. So it's a very real thing. It's very interesting. But they think that the brain has information, and that information sends that information almost like from chaos to order. It sends information that's not in form, and sends it to the retina of the eye, which is mostly water, which rearranges into form and projects it as a hologram. And that hologram is what is being picked up by the sensitive camera. If you think how many orbs we can pick up on the camera and these kinds of things. Now, I also work with my friend Venice McNeil, who her and her husband directed the show Magical Egypt. And she was telling me that the ancient Egyptians knew that there is a huge amount of natural DMT in the retina of the eye. And they were able to even record that to some degree in their architecture and their pictures. And so they believe that a lot of what we actually see in the world is through the lens of DMT and water, which is quite an interesting idea. Yeah. It's hard to find any of Gennedy's pictures. This is Gennedy doing the experiment, I guess. This is how he attached these goggle things to his patient. So it's hard to find any of his pictures. Many have disappeared or made classified, but here are 3. Now I'm lucky enough to have my own private Russian translator. I thought this was a tree. Turns out that actually says antlers. Turns out this actually says snake. So, and you can see this is a clear face here. So here are the pictures that came from the Russian scientists more recently, and this is the setup that they used. So this is really interesting because what we're seeing is imagery that is projected. Now, it didn't work if you didn't have a clear picture in your mind's eye. It only worked when you were very concentrated and you really believed you were seeing something. It's not the same as my work because water's picking up on stuff I'm not even thinking about. And so it's interesting in what I'm feeling. But so this is just like another step, another piece that kind of creates this jigsaw puzzle of how this is working. Now, I have talked a lot, but this is one of the most important things that I can share. My crystallographic method is teaching us about the energetic state of water, the energetic health of water. So here we have frozen tap water that I've frozen, then melted, then held that melted water to my heart for a minute and then refroze. So that you can see that structurally there has been a massive change, but it hasn't changed chemically. So what are we seeing? If it hasn't changed chemically and it's changed structurally, what are we seeing? Well, the closest thing that we can say here is that this is something called moldy, which is life force energy. So that is akin to an emotion. What we're seeing is water is improving emotionally, if you want to use that word, or energetically, that might feel more comfortable for you. This is really, really interesting because I think that we're not just looking at the structures of water as in like, oh, this is good water or this is bad water. See, I actually think poor tap water, it gets such a bad rap. You know, it has all this disorder and everything. And I'm not talking about the drinking of tap water or any of these things. I'm talking about what tap water shows. The fact that tap water can go from disorder to order shows us something very, very important, in that water is actually more like us than we think it is outside of the body. The only difference is, I think, that it has, that it's actually more, if you will, in a spiritual stage. This is the freezing stage. So there are 3 freezing stages. That first freeze is more of the stage of the spirit. The second freeze is more of the stage of the blood, and the third freeze is more of the stage of the body. So here we have more tap water, and here we have the same tap water melted and refrozen after love and gratitude. Sorry about the noise, I'm sure it will stop. This is after being in a singing bowl. This is after it's been through silk. Now, I could spend a lot of time talking about silk, but I won't, because I want to get onto some other topics. But the reason I talk about it at all is I used to spend a lot of time in India. I've traveled a lot, and I've been to India 9 times, and I go out to the villages. And it's the first time I ever saw this ever happen. There were 3 Indian ladies, and they were in the very, poor areas of India. But out in the villages where it's still quite pretty. And often when they get married, the women get married in silk, and it might be the only silk sari that they own. And so two of them were holding open a silk sari. One of them was pumping a water pump, and the water was filtering through the sari and going into a bucket. Now, I asked why they did that through an interpreter, and he said that it filters the water, but once you drink it, their English, they kind of said that it is a spiritual filtering of the heart. Now, Jerry Pollack says that water sitting next to silk builds exclusion zone. That's the type of water inside of ourselves. Now, infrared light helps to build exclusion zone too, which is why it's great to have infrared saunas. Walking barefoot on the ground helps that negative charge to come up through our body because the earth is negatively charged. So interesting though, then when you start looking at the Hertz frequency of materials, I recently discovered that cotton has the same Hertz frequency as a living body, but synthetics have the frequency of someone who is dead. Some of the highest frequencies of materials are wool and linen, up in the 5,000s. So that was a really interesting thing. What happens if I'm frustrated when I'm doing crystallography? Water won't play with me. It's interesting, it kind of thickens and it kind of compacts upon itself to create a darker look rather than that light that we're used to seeing. And what happens if I'm sad? Well, neither of these were because I was projecting the feeling of sad. I was actually sad, and I was using spring water. So what we see is that the spring water didn't degrade and become all horrible. It actually designed a complex pattern of a sad face. So I often feel like even when I'm sad, I'm sad with a friend who sees me. So I have done studies on bodily fluids. I think they're really interesting because there's a lot to learn from bodily fluids because we are so much water. So when you're talking about saliva, this is a simple and easy thing to do by spitting into a dish and freezing it. Now, if anybody's seen a baby crying and they have this long bit of saliva coming out of their mouth that can blow in the wind, well, that is stretchy fourth phase water. You know, it's not just kind of moving or working like water coming out of a tap. It's very unique. And saliva holds so much information. So especially when you kiss someone, you know, you can be on the fence about somebody, think, oh, you know, I think I like them, but I don't know, I'm thinking about it or the other way around. But that first kiss is going to tell you a bunch of information about how you feel about that person, whether you like him in a different kind of way or her. And, you know, this is very interesting because the saliva in our mouth holds so much information about us. And this person here, Candace, says, your saliva is you, distilled into fluid form. When we kiss, we're essentially sharing a tiny bit of our ecosystems. We're swapping genetic information that our bodies unconsciously process. And in doing so, we learn more about each other in an instant than we ever could consciously. But water also, the saliva of your body also stores the vibration of the last words you spoke. So one of the things that I've observed, and this is one of the many examples, is that when you spit into a petri dish, it often will form bubbles and those bubbles will freeze. On top of the bubbles, you'll often see designs that are relative to the last word or sentence that you spoke. For me, the last sentence I spoke was involving the number 8. And what's interesting is that really brings you into the understanding of the importance of saying what you're grateful for, or praying, or blessing your food or water prior to drinking or eating. So a lot of people haven't heard of this, but apparently this has been around for a long, long time. If a woman spits onto a glass and lets it dry and looks under a magnifying glass, if these kind of ferny patterns show, that means she's fertile. If they're not there, she's not fertile. This is a transitioning stage. The fluids of your body can tell you things about your body and your cycle. I think this is really interesting to know. Now, urine, there's a funny picture there. Yeah. Like, how do you get a good picture of urine anyway? Like here, so this seemed appropriate. So it's easily access. You can easily urinate into a dish. But what I've written here is kind of interesting too. So urine releases positive charge. So we're talking about healthy water being negatively charged. So urine releases positive charge and it's 95% water. It has been used as an antiseptic for at least 2,000 years, and glowing phosphorus can be extracted from stale urine. And over a lifetime, the kidneys will filter approximately 1 million gallons of water into urine. Mm-hmm. So here we can see before and afters. Urine, this was me when I had like a thyroid issue a couple of years ago, which I managed to cure using working on myself, figuring out why I had it and got it in the first place, what was the emotional reason, and also doing 8 rounds of IV ozone. I had a big lump in my throat, and it really shows in the urine. There's just nothing going on in here. So it started to really come back to life after doing that. Here is stressed person, and this is after an hour of meditation. This is dehydrated and hydrated. So urine can share a lot of information. Tears, I've always said that if eyes are the windows to the soul, then tears are an expression of spirit. There are different kinds of tears. This lady has done a study on tears using different emotions, and this is an onion tears, which is chemical tears, so they're quite different. So when I had onion tears, it showed me the iris of my eye, but the other tears show more kind of geometries, different types of geometries, which I thought was quite interesting. Blood. So here are 3. One is quite special to me. But so I cut my finger and I just squeezed some of the blood into the water, and it designed this heart. Like, it looks like I've put a little marker around it, but I didn't. So my daughter said, you know, this because you're so loving that there's this heart in there. I thought that was really sweet. I had a miscarriage some years ago, and I got some of the blood and I put some of it into the water, and you can see a little baby in here with his little face and body, and this is almost kind of like the placenta. And I always thought that this was very special. Well, of course it's special to me, and it really shows that the memories we have, you know, they're stored in the water within us, and our entire life really is a memory. If we think about our life, we go back, we're always going back to memory after memory after memory after memory. And I think one of the nicest things that we leave behind, so there's always a piece of us that's alive this way, is that what we leave behind are the memories in other people. Menstrual blood looked really different, kind of like this kind of interesting flower with roots. Breast milk. So this is water after I used the word milk. It didn't show me a cow. It showed me a breast. I thought that was really quite clever. This is breast milk, frozen breast milk. I think it's absolutely beautiful. It really shows you something very important here, and it has a lot of similarities to egg albumin. Now, I did a whole study, which I'm about to show, on egg albumin, because I used to think that any water that's going to be naturally informed surely would be amniotic fluid, but I can't easily have access to that. So I did studies on eggs instead, and I used egg white. And there are 2 types of egg white. There's the part that's gloopy and gelatinous, and then there's this thinner part, more like saliva, that runs out. I freeze that part. So I'm going to share that after this. Wairua. Wairua means the 2 waters, the physical and spiritual, the active participant and the observer. Now, I've talked already about interviewing people with near-death experiences, but I'm going to share some personal things here too. So this is me, and this is my mum. My mum passed away in 1999, and she was my best friend, and she was just incredible. So years and years ago, I used to live in Japan, and Mum and I would write letters to each other. And at the end of every letter, my mum would attempt to draw a circle and put a heart in the middle. And Mum's circles were terrible, and she'd be the first to say that. And so some years ago, I just missed her, and I said to the water, because, you know, I'm not paid to do this. You know, I can do whatever I want. I can play however I want in this field. So I said out loud, can you please connect to my mum? And the first photo I got was this misshapen circle with a heart in the middle. a year later on her birthday, I asked the same question and I got the same picture. And, I think that this is very special because I think water connects realms. I don't think that we are limited by water in any way. Like water doesn't have a limitation, because you even look at hydrogen, and hydrogen, it permeates the universe. And it's extremely interesting when you start putting the word consciousness and water, separately, they might be separate things, together, they really start to make sense. My friend Moses Hackman, he said that water is the glove on the hand of consciousness. I think that water and consciousness are very, very intimately entwined, and that they behave as one. I don't know if water is conscious on its own, or if consciousness and water together create a conscious fluid, but there is some truth within that. So over here, a friend of mine's father had passed. I asked if the water could connect to his dad. I left it overnight. Came back in the morning and a lot of the water had evaporated. So I just froze what was left, and the whole of the water turned into this heart. Here I was thinking about my mum. On my mum's side of our family tree, she would tell me about some of the ancestors she'd heard about from her mother, who had been burnt at the stake as witches, and because they were midwives. And I thought about them, and my mother had a very straight nose, and so it's quite interesting. It's like this beautiful woman with a headdress. And here there was a lady that reached out. Her cat had died, and she was desperately wanted to know if her cat could see her. So that was the design there. I'm not suggesting that water is God, but I think it's a very provocative idea. And there is this thing on Instagram going around with this guy talking. And this is what he says. He says, well, that would mean that God is in us and all around us, above us and below us. It would explain why a woman's water breaks when we're born, and why some religions observe the ritual of baptism. If water was God, then that would mean that God has no gender. God takes the shape of the container God appears in, which would explain why we have so many different belief systems. It would mean that all bodies of water were holy, that a thunderstorm is a church without walls, that when the rain falls, it's an act of God's death giving life, and when it evaporates again, it's the day of resurrection.
Beautiful.
And we can carry on, but I don't know, we might be coming up to an ending, but I do want to talk about the egg thing. It's going to be a nice thing to end on. So this is Luc Montanu's work. He's a very serious scientist. He passed a year within the last 2 years. I got to meet him actually in 2019. But you think my work is kind of amazing? Well, his work is pretty amazing. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for discovering AIDS. So, I mean, he's a very serious scientist, but he got disregarded for this, although it was repeated. So this is an empty test tube of water. This test tube of water has DNA strands in it. It was left over a period of time, 17 hours, subjected to a very low 7 hertz frequency, and also to ambient light. The next day, they found that this empty test tube had the same sequence of DNA in it that this one did. That's why it was called DNA teleportation. Can you imagine what it is then, if that is happening, what it is to be intimate with somebody, what is happening there? Even when women get together, there are a lot of women would have had the experiences of their periods coming into sync. Well, that also happens with hamsters, chimpanzees, golden tamarins, and rats. And science, even though millions of women have reported this, and it's been reported in history, science still says it's not enough evidence to support it.
Can I say something? I don't want to interject here, but I feel like I have to say that water and consciousness, when you're in an intentional state of coherence where your heart and brain and all the organs and glands and cells of your body are in harmony together, that causes everybody around to start getting into harmony. And the more people that become conscious of it, the greater that field of amplification becomes. So I had to just throw that in because
Well, that's perfect, because what I'm going to do is skip through these, because we're going to spend hours. I mean, this is a huge study, so I know those
can we
things.
please do a recurring thing again?
Yeah, so I can talk more about the other ones. I just flipped through on homeopathy.
No, that's fine.
But this ties in with exactly with what you were saying. This will be the last one I share. So the study that I did on egg albumin, I used chicken eggs, duck eggs, quail eggs, and goose eggs. All of them form 6 identified patterns. So this isn't about me using consciousness. Anybody can do this, and it's really fun. And a lot of children have been doing this for their science projects. But it's just about figuring out that saliva-like part, not the gloopy part, and freezing it for about 8 to 10 minutes. So in a free range, very fresh egg, bird egg, you see these 6 patterns. These are the 2 most rudimentary, the pollen and the small star. If you do end up accidentally freezing the gloopy gelatinous part, you're just going to see a lot of these small stars. This is the difference between a caged hen egg and a free range egg. Caged hen eggs only form 2 of those patterns, the 2 most rudimentary. So I wanted to see a lot like Gennady, not Gennady, like
Montaigne.
Yeah, Luc Montaigne. I wanted to see if water, if the egg albumin would be affected by a caged hen egg and a free range hen egg. So I placed one side by side after having done a lot of different studies, knowing exactly what they look like and never seeing more than 2 patterns in caged hen eggs. And I put 2 side by side and left them overnight. The crystallography of the free range egg looked beautiful. The crystallography of the caged hen egg had improved, which was quite surprising. And I shared it on social media, and everyone said, yeah, but what if you surround it by bad eggs? Surely it's going to go bad. So I did that twice. This is my controls, and they're from the same batches. So I put it into this formation, the free range egg in the middle and the caged hen eggs around it. And this was the result of the first one. So beautiful crystallography for the free range egg as expected, but unexpected, amazing crystallography in the fishes that were the closest to it. So we're seeing healing by proximity. The ones that were furthest away improved, but not as significantly. So this happened again. These are my controls. I did this months later, and same thing. Beautiful crystallography in the free range one, but really complex crystallography in the others, which I would say these were free range eggs. Phenomenal. Whereas the ones furthest away clearly didn't create as clear imagery, but had some more complex patterns than they would normally. So the conclusion of that is that I think that nature is looking to improve rather than downgrade, especially in this embryonic stage. I also think that information transfer is possible because water is a liquid antenna and egg albumin is 90% water. And none of these were fertilized. So it's fascinating that information was still transferred to the caged eggs, maybe meaning that the potential for life was there from the beginning. And my personal takeaway is that if you heal yourself, you heal others. These are just comparisons of things that I think the natural patterns of egg albumin look like. Like this is star anise, and this is the egg albumin. This is actually half and half. This is the egg albumin. This is brain coral, feathers. This is real feathers. This is the feathers of the egg albumin. This is a limpet shell. You know, this is horsehair. So it's fascinating. So, you know, again, I can go on, but I'll stop because it's been a long time.
It felt like it went by in a second, my God. So, oh my gosh. How? Why? No need. Like you said, it's like allow yourself to view it as you would art. What does it mean to you, right? Because we all have different evolutionary cycles, you could say, that the soul animating our being is on. And so nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's like you showed, there's sometimes a need for different types of information that may be perplexing to somebody who's really judgmental or biased or thinks they know what something is. So I love the idea of looking at it as art, because that's creativity. And obviously anybody knows the more we express our creativity, the more we start to gain mastery over our own freedom of expression. I love that.
Well, one
You've
thing I
proven that, you've shown it. It's amazing.
said, I actually realized I have forgotten to whiz through the hydroglyphs, which is the third way that water communicates. And this is more scientific. I kind of realized that I can do this in literally 1 minute. So,
And also too, we're gonna, if you have time for some questions, right? If people have
Yep.
any. All right,
Yep.
perfect.
So this is the hydroglyph here for the energy of the word creation. So we know that even in different languages, we've seen this shape appear. So Bhargav in India, for example, played a chant which was all about creation, and he got this creation glyph. So this is the stairway glyph I talked about, from Stairway to Heaven. Now we understood this ring glyph here. We've discussed that ring imagery that appeared. So this is the hydroglyph for the word magic. So we'll get into 64 examples of the coin glyph, which means there's the energy of money, and it also has the energy of abundance. Now, someone said, why would water want to talk about money? It's the root of all evil and blah, blah, blah. But if this is a language, we can't pick and choose what we want to talk about, what words should be in the language. But also it's an invitation to ask yourself, what is your relationship with money? Do you know your own value? These kinds of things. It's not literal, like, for example, if I'm holding up a pencil and I say, here's a pencil, nobody's falling over in excitement. But if I say this is the energy of a pencil, we can say, oh, well, that the energy of a pencil is to design, is to create. It's, there's a lot could be said about the energy of something, and that's the invitation. This is the energy of the word, both living and death. I think that's really interesting, because somebody asked me, who was told they only had a few months to live, what does death look like? And I kept seeing the living glyph. And I realized eventually that, of course, water doesn't die. It's always in one of its stages. So to water, death is another word for life. It's simply a transition. These are 64 examples of the star glyph, which means light. Its predominant meaning is light. And this is the message glyph, 64 examples of it. It looks like a sort of a triangle with frills on either side. Some of them at the tip have these hearts, so we know they're emotional messages. We're working with people all over the world who are specialized in picture languages and ancient languages. So we see there is an overlay with even hieroglyphs, which were designed to be seen and felt rather than spoken, and they share concepts rather than one word. This means change as well as winter. This means information. This means purity and enlightenment. It's the lotus glyph. So this is the tree of life. They go on, but I just wanted to show that, because I think it's good to see some science, because I like to sit somewhere in the middle, which is the camp of art, really, where I invite science and I invite consciousness to kind of come and have a look at everything. But I actually have been invited to be a speaker within the scientific section of the next water conference. And when you see repeatability like this, there's really something there. And when you see other people getting it too. So I'm sharing that. And like Jerry Pollack has invited me to write a scientific paper about this. And I've been invited for it to be published in 2 scientific journals. So I'm just saying that we can talk about it being the consciousness and the this and the this. But like Jerry said, we're not getting any younger, he said at the conference. There needs to be something for people who are interested in this work to actually have some reference to. He said, if you really want to help the world, you need to include the science. with everything else. So I've been given a wonderful platform to be able to do that, of which I'm very grateful.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm speechless. Honestly, I'd rather not talk. So if anybody has any questions.
There is just so much information to absorb during all that. That was just so beautiful. But and you know, I don't know. I have so many questions, but we can go on and on and on and on about everything. But you know, especially like the remote viewing and the construct, you know, of time and everything. You know, it's kind of like, because I've taken some remote viewing classes in the past too, and I'd love to get back into it. But just like, you know, the subconscious and everything, just amplifying that you know, that to, you know, the water, it kind of has a similarity to like remote viewing, where if you're in a remote viewing session, you can not see all the detail. You can see like the mountains, you can see like certain structures, and you know, that's part of like, you know, getting into the subconscious and actually drawing it out. But it has a very similar kind of effect or connotation to, you know, how the crystallization of the water is actually being formed. That's very so interesting.
Oh, that's really helpful to hear. It's kind of makes Geneti's work even more kind of important to me, because it has that kind of slightly fuzzy look about it. And so, yeah, I just find it fascinating. And there's so much that that hasn't been shared, which is really a shame, but it's such a common thing when there's something that's actually really, truly amazing. And even about his death, apparently there was some kind of suicide, of which his brother, who he's very close to, spoke to him just a couple of hours before. And he said, I've just made this amazing breakthrough. It's going to change the world and this and this. And then he's dead. So that seemed very suspicious to his family and things. And so, you know, a lot of his work just went underground.
Yeah, the old ways.
Yeah. So let me look through here. There's I'm just trying to look at some of the questions.
Plus, Greg, we're not able to see the questions on the other platforms, right?
Well, I do have the chat pulled up. If anybody on the other platforms we're streaming to right now would like to ask any questions, I can relay those over. Anybody on the Zoom call, just feel free to, you know, find a moment of silence here, chime in, unmute yourself, or if you want to raise your hand, be more official, go right ahead.
I do see some familiar faces here, so it's really nice to see you all. I've seen some people who've been on some of my master classes and stuff, and so I really appreciate it when I see your familiar faces out there. It always means a lot to me. So maybe I'll talk about the next masterclass I've got coming up. It's over 3 days, so I've been doing these marathon masterclasses, so I've decided to learn from that and actually do it over a 3-day period of time. But in America, it's on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of June. And the topic is what different religions, cultures, and ancient texts can teach us about water. And I have 27 people speaking from all around the world, from different religious beliefs and different cultural beliefs. And some of those people are just so inspiring. I have one man that a lot of people ask me to get to speak. His name's Puma. He is an Andean priest. He was struck by lightning at 6 years old, and he's going to be talking about water from his perspective, which I'm really looking forward to. We have my friend she is a Catholic nun. She's 75 years old. She's unlike any Catholic nun I've ever met. And she studied shamanism for quite some time. And she talks about religion in a way in which I think is quite unique. She said that religions are like boats on the sea of God, and they all get you to feel the different rhythms and movements of God. She said some of the boats are like battleships and some of them are like canoes, but they're all very different, and it's up to us to learn to jump and dive into the water. So she has a very open way of talking, and she's had her own very personal experience with water and a waterfall, which I'm really looking forward to hearing her. Another person, Olga, she's going to be talking about water from Russian folklore perspective. And they had lots of different types of water. And so she intrigues us by saying, we've heard of living waters, but dead waters were actually used for a purpose. There was a type of dead water that the heroes of these legends used to use for a specific reason. So it's really interesting when you start hearing about the biblical stories and how, for example, there was the word, and we've talked a lot about power of words here, but also where the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. So there was water and there was a face. Then you start looking from a Maori perspective and the legends and stories about water. We have a saying that that the health of the river reflects the health of the people. There is this idea, there was one particular tribe I'm thinking of that identified with we all identify with all of nature, but one particular type of bird that was very endangered here in New Zealand, and they felt very responsible for it, as you would like a child or a family member. And as it was going extinct, they too felt that they were going extinct. So there is this, and then of course there's the Vedic perspective, the idea of the Mother Ganga, and all of the different stories within that realm. We have this beautiful Jalal, this Muslim guy who is talking about water from an Islamic perspective, but he also studies quantum physics. So he's fascinating. We have someone from Israel who is talking about the Kabbalah, and within the Kabbalah there is the Book of Creation, which is suggesting that water is the highway really to combine and create worlds and to share information from different worlds. And he's fascinating. I'm absolutely excited to hear him speaking. We have someone speaking from a Sikh perspective, from all these different kind of places, and of course Kalani Souza from Hawaii, from an Indigenous Hawaiian perspective. So we're covering a lot of territory. But we can talk all day long about restructuring water and different types of water we go on a drink, and it's such a first world problem that we appear to have. But when we really dive into the question of what is water, and when we start to see that religions, all religions, and ancient and texts and indigenous wisdom can come together in the name of water, then we have a truth. If we start to understand what is water, then we start to appreciate so much about this living water system that we are, as well as the nature systems around us and the water in the air. We always forget about that. It's because of the water in the air and our electrical charge that we're able to have intuition. We have an electrical charge which can be felt and measured by heart math. It's not woo-woo, but the water in the air that's been evaporated, the fact that we breathe means there's water in the air. It's attracted to the electrical charge, and that enables us to have this liquid antenna of information coming in and putting out about ourselves. It's the connection between water and spirit. It's how we can observe ourselves in that past, in that near-death experience as the observer in dreams. I've done a whole study on dreams. So there's a lot we can get into on that topic next time. But yeah, but if anyone wants to join that, I really recommend it. It's probably going to be my most significant masterclass for a very long time. I don't think
that. Can we put it in the chat here?
Yeah, and are those master classes done live also? Or are they pre-recorded or?
No, they're all done live and they're recorded.
Great.
So everybody gets the recording if their time zone doesn't allow, but I try my best. I'm waking up at 6 in the morning, 2 of those days, just to allow for people in the UK and the US to be able to be part of that. So yeah, there's that. It's on my website, vedaustin.com, and the workshops tab. So
Awesome.
yeah. Well, we have lots of people here, so I don't know if there's any more questions, but doesn't look like it. So I think I might maybe leave it there. Unless you have some questions, Seth?
No.
Well, you know what? Kind of like you said,
It's not
I'm
Veda
more
Austin.
focused. Go ahead.
Sorry.
What?
Somebody wrote VedaAustin.org.
I did. See, that's how like
It's VedaAustin.com.
I'm just like in a state of bewilderment. I always am whenever you share anything with me. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
.com. Maybe I can erase that. Let's see. Yeah.
Don't
You know,
worry.
another thing that's really fascinating, is you brought up during your speech also synchronistic, and I'd like to add in there even like, interconnectedness, and, the water connects all of us. And I bought this a while ago. This is a analemma. You probably heard of this crystal. So when you're talking about structured water, I have not used this enough, but I want to use it more. So it's supposed to be a way to actually stir your water and to give it more structure.
The only issue I have with that, because I've been asked to be an affiliate multiple times by the analemma people, and I love Tom Cohen. He's a friend of mine and he's fantastic. The only issue I have, and I've spoken to the owner, to one of the creators of that wand when I was in Germany at the water conference, and I said to him, because I work with signature patterns so much, what I see when I use that, although it improves the structures of tap water, it changes it to the signature pattern of quartz. So that wand is quartz. Inside they have the mother water, but the mother water can't go anywhere. So no matter how beautiful a container you're in, you're still in a container and water is meant to move. And so my concern with that, because of course, Seth, you know all about crystals. When you look at some crystals, they have water trapped in them. And that's a very organic and natural thing that can happen. But one of the ways that it's in there is because it gives these beautiful rainbows. But the analemma wand doesn't do any rainbows. It doesn't give them off. And so what I suggested to them was that maybe they make it so that the top twists off, so you can release the water and replace it again. And so that would be a really nice thing for it to be able to do. So the ideas around it are so good. Like they've done so much science, but I'm so much into relationship with water, and I relate into what I would like. And I know that I wouldn't like to be in something without being allowed to kind of flow and move somewhere. So that's my only thing about them. Although one of the things that I did was, because I felt into it, I'm like, I'm going to use it like a thermometer. So I put it in my mouth and then I stirred the water, and it did make some changes then. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how would that actually, have you tried using one of these with crystallizing the water, freezing it?
That's what I just said. What I saw, that it crystallized into, when I used it on tap water, it improved the tap water, but there are signature patterns of different crystals that I've used, and it created the signature pattern of quartz, because the outside is quartz. So I'm concerned about the water inside of it. So if it was a quartz wand, that would be one thing. But again, I understand the concepts, and I think the concepts are really good. My only concern is that the water isn't going anywhere. And there could be a simple fix with that if they just made it so that it could be opened, and then I know the man has a really strong relationship with the water though, which I really appreciate. And he actually really listened to me, which I also really appreciate, which means that at least he cared. That's the main thing.
I see.
We've got Shima, yeah.
How are you? Nice to see you back.
So I have come out of my awe to come up with a question. Actually, I have two. So if I was to do some experiments myself, I'm thinking maybe I would buy some Petri dishes. And would I buy glass ones? I imagine glass would be better over plastic. And the other question was, with the egg experiment, was there any study if the the restructuring of the eggs that were surrounding the free range one, did they sustain that for any period of time, or did they revert back? Or so, two questions.
Okay, well, the first one is that I only use glass petri dishes. Glass is hydrophilic, so it's water loving, and glass is essentially made of silica. Silica is a crystal. Crystals help water store information for longer. Crystals also store information, full stop. They're in all of our computers and technology. So I only use glass. All of those details are in the CMP guide and stuff like that, though, and I teach on the workshops. There's a lot of little details like that I give in that. Also, when it comes to the egg, we've started doing a thing where we let it melt and then refreeze it to see how long things last for. And I've done that a lot with my water samples as well. So we have seen that it does appear to be stable for at least 2 rounds of crystallography. So that was a good question. I don't get asked very often, and I often forget to share. So I appreciate that.
Amazing. So we've got Loretta who's asking what the name of the doctor who speaks about CFS is.
Mauro Zapatira. I just put it in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, he's fantastic. And I'm doing a whole, I usually only do 2 or 3 or 4 masterclasses, and this year it's only 3 because of the amount of traveling I have to do this year. But I'm having another one in November, end of November, on natural healing. And so I've got a few friends speaking on that who are really inspiring. One of them is Shaveen, who a lot of people on Instagram may have heard of. Yeah. And Mauro is also speaking, as well as a number of other people and doctors that I think have a lot of really wonderful things to talk about.
I just have one more thought. This came up when Seth first mentioned you last week. So I was curious, and I went online to see when Emoto passed away, and then looking at your website when you became fully committed to this work. And there's an interesting time frame when he passed and when you picked up like the torch and took it to a whole nother level. And that's kind of like a woo-woo kind of thought, but I'm just wondering if like that spirit of Emoto is somehow overlighting you in some way to help the work go on to a whole nother level. I don't know.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I certainly invite, because he certainly helped a lot of people like me be able to really be understood better because of the groundwork he already did.
You know, I want to throw into that. I've had way too many near-death experiences to count. And some of them were like almost disconnected, and others were completely, seemingly disconnected, the consciousness from the body. And the amount of timelines and energy and information, everything that comes through, I was experiencing how my soul is an amalgamation of a lot of my ancestors as well as other souls, you know, in addition to my own unique creative, you know, essence that is coming through here. And I think probably a lot of people have similarities to that, you know.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I mean, I've had my own kind of near-death experience as well, so it was pretty out there. But I think that there's always more. There's always more than we see, and maybe more than we understand. But we're so fortunate in that we have the ability to feel. And you know, and it's kind of like whenever I think about my mom, for example, it's kind of like, you know how we breathe and we don't think about it. There's all these functions of the body that just happen, and we don't think about them unless we put focus on them. And yet they're still happening without our conscious awareness of them actually happening, unless we bring our conscious and awareness to them. Well, whenever I think about my mum, who has been gone now for so long, and I bring my focus to her, I realized, I've always been thinking of her just like I'm breathing. And I feel like that about people also that I love that have passed. And so it's such an emotional connection, and the emotional connection transcends this physical. And we're so fortunate.
Mm.
All right, everybody, it's 12:30 here and I have to be going soon. So if there are any more questions, please ask. But other than that, I've had a wonderful time talking about all the things I'm most passionate about. And it's been really nice to see familiar faces. Hi to Grandpa Bill and and to everybody.
Long-term supporter.
Yeah, no.
Just one thought I'll put into the field for maybe later percolation. It got me thinking, and I think we even touched upon it a little bit. If one person is very close to another person physically, with the eggs, like if some person is sick and another person is healed, what's happening there? And also, like, even psychologically, if one person is healthy and then there's another person who's more like narcissistic or something, and is it always the higher frequency person that's going to impact the other, or could it be reverse, and like could the other person make the sicker person make the healthier person sick?
I think we've all had experiences where we've maybe been in relationships that haven't been good for us and we've stayed longer than we should. But ultimately, the reason that we stayed was because there was some part of us that was allowing it where we needed to heal. So it's an interesting one when you're looking at these human dynamics, but certainly within the primordial embryonic stages, it makes sense that in that area, the improvement is a very organic and natural thing to happen. If we look at nature, things that haven't been done well or have something deformed or something wrong, they don't do well in nature. It makes much more sense that there is an upgrade. And also, I think that we're naturally attracted to people that actually uplift us. That's why the people that are in bad relationships go to the people that they love, which is why the person who might be narcissistic will stop them from going to be around their friends and loved ones that love them, because those loved ones have such power to be able to uplift those other people. And eventually, when you become strong enough, you leave that situation and then you get stronger, and then you inspire other people that might have been in that situation. Clearly, I'm talking from some experience whereby you are able to actually then help. But we have to learn how to help ourselves. We have to become that whole so that we can actually be, well, not that whole. It's not that we're broken, but there is this wonderful kind of ability that we have to self-reflect and learn to love all the different faces that we've been and the reflections we've been along our journey. So this ability to begin to heal, it's such a process, but it's so important, even if it's just to begin with being kind to yourself. And I think for the most part, I mean, you can look at the news and think that everything is turning to custard, but in fact, for the most part, I think people are kind. People love their family, they love their friends, they love their children. We have a lot more in common than we have that's different if you just really look at the organics of things. So that's kind of a little bit about what I had talk about that. And this is what I'm seeing in living organisms. And I think there's a lot more to it, a lot more around the so-called junk DNA, which I don't think is junk at all. I think that this amniotic fluid, a lot of people have been say that it's more for the cushioning of the bird and this kind of thing, or the embryo. But I think that there's a great deal of information that's stored in there. I do think it's how ancestral information is shared to the baby or the embryo. It ties in with the Rupert Sheldrake's morphinogenic fields. So there's a lot there. I think that it's a deep and philosophical question based off a study that you can kind of take in whichever place most resonates for you, where it makes the most sense. but I have 5 minutes until I have to go. So we'll have to start wrapping this up, I'm afraid.
Well, Veda, thank you so much. It was so nice to be able to just get this update. I haven't, like I said, I'm almost speechless, and after this, I'm just gonna go totally relax, and I'm gonna let all this integrate, because oh my God, thank you for doing this and being who you are and bringing this work through, because of the amount of individuals that it can inspire to do this and greater, right? Like, that's beautiful. That's selfless giving. And
Thank you.
the world definitely loves examples of that. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate everybody that listened and that takes us seriously. For me, this is very serious work. I am prolific. I do it every day, and I care about it a lot. And I'm so happy that other people are learning how to do it. And I share more people's work now than my own, which is saying a lot. That shows that it isn't just random and that it's something important. I think the only little tip I might give is don't go into this work with expectations. Even for the people that already have a love for water, this is a spiritual journey, and water tests us. You know, it's like you can go in thinking, oh, she's going to show me this amazing thing, or this and this and this. And if you just see a signature pattern, you might go, oh, why did that happen? I think then that's the time when we can reflect upon our need to know, our need to see, our need for whatever it is tends to come from the ego space, I guess. So time after time I have to be reminded to let a lot of my expectations go. And that's why children are so good at this work, because they go into it for fun and out of curiosity, as opposed to with an expectation of an outcome. That's what lends it into kind of what it is to be human. The more we let go, the more is able to happen, the more can fill, our bucket of experiences in life. And so, yeah, just have fun with it. Water will show you one of those three things: a signature pattern, an artistic expression, or hydroglyphs. And you can get the whole list of my hydroglyphs on my website as well. So if you don't have any money and you're just working towards getting to a better financial place, I mean, my CMP guide of learning how to do this is $30. But if you write the word blessing in the code, it's free. The hydroglyphs are available for when you're able to afford that, and they're $40, so the workshop, for 3-day workshop, and you get the whole entire bundle of everything, all my PDFs and all my stuff and how to do it, as well as the 3 days of people talking about this amazing topic of water, God, and spirit, is $100. And then my beginners workshops are $50, but they're pretty much almost all sold out. I have to add more in, but it's kind of try to make it affordable for people, because I don't want someone who really, really wants to do this to not be able to do it because they can't afford it. So there's options for everybody there.
Thank you for that. Amazing.
Awesome. And you know what? We probably only scratched on the surface. I know you can go on for hours and hours, and that's what, like, being the total subject matter expert on it is, that you could just talk and educate people. So I think it was a very, very great session, and really appreciate you coming on. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate you and everybody.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Veda. Yeah. See you soon.
Thank you. And then in closing, guys, again, VedaAustin.com is her website. And we do hold weekly coherence meditations here. If anybody would like to join, it's at freedomsnap.org/Seth. There's also a calendar link on there. You can add it to your calendar to get reminded. And our preferred platform is Zoom, while we do restream out to 5 different other platforms at the same time.
Bye, Veda.
All right, guys. Thank you.
We can keep it. Greg, in your vein. Yeah.
Yep.
The work that these coherence meditations do are really an extension of everything that she has presented, but not just presented. She's done so many of them so many times and gotten repeatable results, which says something profound, which is that the power of habit, when applied to something as seemingly like we don't even have the ability to imagine the extent of infinity, but with habit, with practice, we begin to turn on new extra senses in and around that tune into that. And the more in my life, I found the more I have these experiences, some of them are so electrifying and beautiful, but the more I can relax and just make peace with it and get into this state, no matter what it is, the animating force in all of us, it just has a way of placing it and making it so coherent and complete. Like it does the work when we get out of the way. So that's what these will do. And obviously the idea is like she said, with women and their moon cycles synchronizing, same thing with hearts and minds. When we do that and we're with all kinds of other people who are doing that, yeah.
It reminds me of, and I mentioned it before, the music meter, you know, how they have 100 different music meters starting at different intervals going back and forth, you know, but they all go in eventually after a couple of minutes, they all go in synchronicity.
Excellent metaphor.
Pulling
Yeah.
up that YouTube video. Yeah. All right, guys.
Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
very much, everybody attending. We will see you next week.